When I think civil disobedience, and I expect most Americans think, you think about the civil rights movement. Civil disobedience against what I'm sure we would both agree was an absolutely pernicious episode in the American landscape. Not to say it's resolved, because clearly racial problems persist in a big way to this day, particularly we've seen vis-a-vis African Americans and the police. But that strikes me, and I'll bet you most listeners, as a very clear example of not only legitimate, but essential civil disobedience. In your case, you're talking about some pretty refined things. I mean, here is a workplace safety standard that you think is a bad idea and a waste of time. I could easily find someone on the other side of that argument. I'm sure you'd agree. That doesn't pull at the heartstrings or even the mind strings the way, say, racial discrimination does.
Not your heartstrings, maybe.
So say more about that.
No, to me, well, let's talk about vocational issues. There are others, but let's talk about vocational issues. To me, one of the deep sources of satisfaction in life is practicing a vocation that you love and love to do well and take pride in. Okay, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And to the extent that you have lots of people in some vocations, including physicians and small business people of all kinds, where they say, I can't do what I want to do in the terms of providing a good or a service. It's getting in the way. It's impeding freedom in a really important way.
So let me jump in here. I mean, presumably they can't do what they want to do, not because of some arbitrary bee that a regulator had in their bonnet, although that may look very much that way to you and your colleagues, but because somebody along the way thought what you want to do is going to hurt somebody else. So again, you're kind of a bit of a judge and jury here, it seems to me.
Well, no, I have a very different view of what the government's role is. So for me, the meaning of the American experiment was a presumption of freedom. So if you are practicing your craft, the presumption is you do that the very best you can. If you make a mistake that hurts somebody, you are vulnerable to the tort system.
That goes back to the founders.
That goes back to the founders. Yeah, you are vulnerable if you are negligent or screw up. Okay. But otherwise, you have a presumption of freedom. I don't want to characterize your opinion. I would say that the progressive movement, I'm defining that in its early 20th century terms, with its Germanic origins, and Woodrow Wilson's progressivism, was one of the first times that it was assumed that the state knows better, and that experts can say, no, actually, you should not live under a presumption of freedom. We will decide what's okay and what's not. We will decide this is not safe. We will decide that this is not ethical. We will decide this is not fair, and we will promulgate these rules, and we now live under a presumption of constraint. So when you say, well, somebody along the line said that this was going to cause a safety problem. Yeah, somebody did, but the presumption we should, okay, here's where we really get on the ideological. If I'm minding my own business and have not hurt anybody, for someone to use the power of the state to say, well, you haven't hurt anybody, you haven't done anything wrong, but I'm going to lay all these constraints on you because you might, that's wrong.